You're listening to ARC. In 1910, a woman by the name of Old Katje approaches Lance Corporal Ross from the Cape Mounted Police in Schasiepen in the southern Kalahari. She has brought an interpreter to help her make a statement. "I'm a female bushman, the third wife of Ko," she says. She goes on to explain that her husband recently died from malaria, followed by his son, and then another of his wives. Soon after, she reports 2 white men and 3 natives arrived and dug up the 3 bodies. They cooked them in a pot and took their bones. She says she is sick from sorrow and has wept for days. And also that she wanted to report the matter as soon as she heard about it, but she didn't. She was told that Bushmen were outside the law and she would have gotten no hearing. This is one of the few witness statements from the relatives of people whose bones Pöch took from the Kalahari. But it wasn't Pöch who dug up the graves. It was Mr. Minarto, a newly hired assistant who would be instrumental in the final frenzy of Pöch's bone collection in the Kalahari. You're listening to the Unburied Podcast. This is the last episode of this season about the final frenzy of Pöch's collection and what happened to all the bones in the 100 years since they were taken. My name is Rasmus Bitsch, and this is episode 4, The Return. As you might remember from the previous episode, now and again Rodolf Pöch has his moments of weakness. He'll sit down with his diary and express what I can best describe as a kind of imposter syndrome. He compares himself to others. For example, he writes, "I don't feel like I can match up to M. Altogether not. I feel betrayed and lied to, but I don't know why." On the 19th in the morning, he went measuring. He was not shy in his demands. He promised to fulfill all my wishes. If I don't get it done myself, I might as well let someone else do it. Pöch feels unable to match up to his own assistant, Mr. Minarto, whom he has been paying to collect bones and measure people. And Minarto doesn't appear to be held back by compassion or self-doubt. Here's Professor of History Ciraj Rassool explaining how Minarto deals with the remains of an elderly couple named Klaas and Trooi Pienaar.
Minarto chose not to boil those corpses down to bone on the spot, according to Rudolf Pöch's instructions. Instead, he made the call that those remains be collected as corpses. And so he broke the legs at the knees and then stuffed them into a single barrel which he filled with salt.
After Pöch hires Minarto to collect on his behalf, he travels across the Kuruman district and fills up his own ox wagon with human remains, artifacts and ancient rock art. When the wagon makes it to Cape Town, in addition to the rock art and the bodies of Klaas and Trooi in the barrels, Minarto has collected 31 full skeletons. Aside from Klaas and Trooi, we know the relatives of Old Katje was on the cart. She's the woman who makes a complaint to Lance Corporal Ross. The report he writes is unique, not because Old Katje is distressed, but because Ross actually listens to her. He writes, These Bushmen are sure to have relatives living somewhere about there, and I think that some consideration ought to have been given to these people's feelings. For Bushmen as they are sure of being pained at seeing the bodies of their relatives treated in such a manner. Ross's statement isn't exactly revolutionary. He says he understands the need for bones for scientific purposes. But still, his statement stands out because he doesn't deny the Bushmen their feelings, their basic humanity. Here is Sophie Schasiepen.
Of course, people understood that this wasn't ethical. Of course, they understood that this would, in their words, hurt, people's feelings.
Mr. Minato is investigated by the authorities. Again, not because they are against the exhumation of human remains, but because of Minato's methods.
And of course, they were also worried in terms of governance, how much this would destabilize the situation if they continued to inflict so much harm on people.
The government isn't quite sure what to do about this Austrian anthropologist who digs up so many graves on British territory.
So there was actually conflicting ideas around if this should be allowed, and the kind of common theme seems to be that officially it wasn't allowed, but unofficially one wouldn't, oppose it.
But while the government isn't quite sure what to do, the collection intensifies. Pöch himself is preparing to leave southern Africa, but he has engaged at least one more assistant by the name of George St. Lennox, who goes by the name of Scotty Smith. A man who's gonna become a prolific trafficker in human remains in the following decade. Because while Pöch wraps up his collection efforts, the trafficking in human remains from the Kalahari continues to intensify over the next decades. Selling bones from indigenous peoples becomes a lucrative business.
And then there are hints throughout the literature in some places that it wasn't necessarily, maybe not Pöch himself, but some of the people that he worked with might have gone so far as to actually kill people to sell them. Is that your impression that that's true?
I do think it's very likely, yes. In the German Empire and German Southwest Africa, it was legal to kill indigenous people who couldn't prove who they were working for. You were allowed to shoot them. So if this is the rule in the everyday, then I don't think we can rule out that this also happened. It seems very likely.
On the 29th of November 1909, Pöch is at sea. He's on his way home. Here, he writes a letter to the Austrian Academy of Sciences. I was successful in increasing the number of collected skeletons to 100. There are a few good Bushman skulls among them. Moreover, I have 25 single skulls. Furthermore, one male and one female Bushman body was exhumed a few weeks after death and could be preserved in relatively good condition. Pöch is bragging. His collection has grown extensively with the help from his assistants, who will be sending him even more bones. 2 years later, he'll be appointed professor of anthropology and go on to be celebrated for his extensive collection that will form the backbone of establishing Vienna as a center for racial anthropology.
He became a hero of collecting.
This is Walter Sauer.
So part of his reputation was because he was considered a big collector. He published very few things and then often only report of his traveling, not academic analysis, because he died early. So his reputation was more based on his collections.
Pöch dies in 1921. He's 51 years old. And when he dies, the Academy of Science inherits.
When Pöch died, he left a fortune to the Academy financially. So most of his legacy went to the Academy, and there was a lot of research funded from the Pöch legacy. And so this reactionary perception was reinforced by a sort of economic base he established.
In the following decades, the establishment at the Academy celebrates Pöch as a hero. And the research his collections contribute to culminates in the late 1930s.
The Academy of Science was basically ruled or run by right-wing, conservative, or even very, very much right-wing professors. I mean, humanities may be a little bit different, but natural science was ruled by, there were a lot of Nazis in between 1938 and 1945.
At this point, Pöch has been dead for years, which, according to Walter Sauer, contributed to keeping his own reputation untarnished for so long.
You know, when Hitler took over Austria, his mindset was very close to these race ideologies of the Nazis.
So you're saying actually that you believe that in a way his reputation was saved because he died too soon to become a Nazi. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, that's at least my personal view. But his reputation survived the Second World War and was very prominent even in the 60s and 70s.
Pöch is never universally condemned. Even today, you might remember there's still a street named after him in Vienna. But his reputation is no longer glowing like it used to be. At least in part because of a coincidental discovery Walter Sauer makes in a gift shop.
You won't believe it, but it was in Cape Town, in the bookshop of the Iziko Museum today.
In the early 2000s, Walter Sauer is in South Africa, or the new South Africa as he calls it. He is deeply personally invested after having worked for the anti-apartheid movement in Austria for decades. And here in the Iziko Museum gift shop, he finds a book written by two historians, Martin Lagassic and Ciraj Rassool.
Did you know about, you knew about Pöch before reading it?
Well, I knew the name, but nothing specific. And then I saw the book, and then I look through the index, if the book have indices. So I see there's Pöch, there's Austria, there's Vienna. Interesting.
And then you start reading, and what happens? Are you surprised or?
Well, I was surprised, but this was exactly the sort of information I was looking for.
The book is called Skeletons in the Cupboard, and it's a print of the first research paper that seriously sparks a wider discussion about what to do with the human remains collections in South African institutions. Here's one of the authors, Professor Ciraj Rassool.
We made an argument that a museum such as the South African Museum that was democratizing itself was not a place for the presence of racialized human remains, and we made a case for the return and reburial of these remains.
When Walter Sauer brings his discovery, the little book, back to Austria, he wants to share what he's found out about Pöch with the scientific community. And he's lucky, because right then, a conference about Pöch is underway.
There was a research project underway in Austria to find out what was left from the Pöch collections, because the collections were distributed after he died. So they said, okay, let's come together and we see who has got what to make an inventory.
Criticizing Pöch isn't really the point of the conference, but Sauer and his activist colleagues see an opportunity.
That was a good platform for us, although the intention at the time was still, Pöch is a famous collector and it is just that we need more information about his achievements. So the intention was a bit different.
He brings the book to the organizer, Professor Maria Teschler, who's shocked by what she reads.
I should credit the organizers of this conference because they immediately said, okay, we didn't know, let's invite these two people.
The two people, Martin Legasik and Ciraj Rassool, are surprised to be invited to Vienna.
The main purpose that Martin and I had was to intervene in the field in South Africa, to make a case for museums to deaccession their human remains collections and to undertake a project to rebury people. And lo and behold, we were invited to this conference in Vienna, the celebratory conference of Pöch, for his multimedia legacy as a scholar.
But when Legasik and Rassool gets up on the stage, they pull no punches.
We presented our joint lecture about Rudolf Pöch in all of the bloody detail of boiling, degraded, unburied bodies down to skeleton, the detail of what happened to Klaas and Trooi Pienaar.
And as they lay out the details of how Pöch amassed the large collection that the scholars are there to discuss, the mood in the room changes.
And as we spoke, we noticed that many of the colleagues in the audience were in tears, that they had shock on their faces when they started realizing the extent to which their own hands were dripping with blood as they were the inheritors of this ghastly racist legacy.
And then when he finished, there was silence. And then some people felt uneasy, others were really concerned, and it changed the whole conference.
For the first time since Pöch dug them out of the ground in the Kalahari, the bones are no longer nameless objects. They are remains of real human beings. But only two of them are no longer nameless, Trooi and Klaas Pienaar, whom Legasik and Rassool specifically mention. And these two names jerk the memory of the conference organizer, Maria Teschler.
And then Maria Teschler said, I remember somewhere there is a box of human remains with a label. And I will look it up, what the label says. And then next morning she comes and says, I found the box and this is named Pienaar.
Wow.
So that was really by sheer luck.
And was that presented to Rassool and Legasik? Did they see the...
Yes, they saw it.
And how did they react? Do you remember?
The whole atmosphere was very thoughtful the next morning, and I think there was a commitment among many of participants to say, now we have to do something. And I was then suggesting repatriation.
In March 2025, my colleague Neil and I are on a reporting trip for a different story that takes us right across the Northern Cape and the Southern Kalahari. From the car, I recognize many of the place names from Rudolf Pöch's notes, but there isn't much to see and the distances here are vast. so we don't stop. Not until we get to Kuruman, where there's one site I want to see. The grave of Trooi and Klaas Pienaar.
No, I'm looking for Klaas and Trooi. Klaas and Trooi Pienaar. No?
The names of Klaas and Trooi Pienaar. You don't know, right? No one? No one knows where it is. So,
Can we just ask at the police station?
but it isn't exactly a major tourist attraction, and it takes a while before we find anyone who knows where the grave is.
Do you know where that is?
Is it Trooi?
Yes.
The one who was buried here?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Follow you. Okay, I'm in that red car. We'll follow you.
Okay.
Thank you.
A local police officer who wants to remain anonymous, because I guess it doesn't technically count as police work to help two reporters locate a grave. But when we finally find the graveyard on the edge of town, it feels like it was worth the effort.
So this is would you call it the Kuruman cemetery or what is? Yeah. Kuruman graveyard. It's actually a very beautiful, peaceful place. Sparse trees are surrounding the many tombstones. It's very green here now, probably because it has rained a bit recently, but it's very green, almost lush. And there's one particular fenced-in area where there are 5 graves, and one of them is Klaas and Trooi Pienaar, and the grave is this side.
It's one of history's cruel twists of fate that Mr. Minato is the indirect reason Klaas and Trooi Pienaar aren't still in boxes in Vienna. Because it was his decision to stuff their entire bodies into a barrel that meant they remained separate from all the others. Here is Ciraj Rassool.
Their remains were always kept slightly separate, so they were not kept with the others because their remains existed in the collection as corpses for a very long time. And it was only decades later that their corpses had degraded to such an extent that they were macerated and taken down to bone.
But identifying Klaas and Trooi was only the first step. What followed was a long and complex legal process that would take another 4 episodes to fully explain. So I won't go into those details here, because the whole point of the exercise, as Ciraj Rassool explains, was to give back to Klaas and Trooi what was taken from them: their humanity and their peace. A cultural and spiritual process that the traditional leader of the Komani San, Petrus Farboy, was brought in to facilitate.
The enormous skill with which Petrus Farboy carried out these ceremonies, in which he explained to Klaas and Trooi what the delegation had come to do and what had been found out about their unburial, and how important this was for the people of South Africa.
The following day, it was time for the official proceedings at the South African High Commission. Ministers from both countries spoke, as did Walter Sauer and Ciraj Rassool. And while they spoke, Petrus Farboy undertook the required ceremonies.
Sitting in between the caskets of Klaas and Trooi Pienaar, with smoke from burning buchu of kooigoed rising up in the tarpaulin, with Petrus Farboy with a little bow and arrow shooting an arrow into the top of the tarpaulin above the caskets. And for this ceremony to unfold. And during those ceremonies, even me, I found myself as one of the people, as part of the delegation of indigenous origin, turned into a pallbearer and carrying these caskets and being part of these extremely poignant, heartfelt ceremonies of return, and knowing that this was important for every one of us as people.
Back at the cemetery in Kuruman, I read the text on the plaque. It summarizes the same story I've now spent 4 episodes of a podcast making.
And then a short text that describes in English and Afrikaans, essentially what happened, that Rudolf Pöch took the bodies of Klaas and Trooi, took them to Austria and then they put it in inverted commas, like scientific study. And they were returned to a democratic South Africa in 2012. And then it says that the plaque was unveiled by Jacob Zuma, then President Jacob Zuma.
It was a big event, the reburial. The president was here and it became a show, says the police officer who shows us the graves. And some of the locals were upset because they felt like it became about the politicians rather than the family and the community, as it tends to do when politicians are present. I wonder what Klaas and Trooi would have thought about all of this.
It's quite a strange feeling to think about how did it happen that these completely ordinary folk ended up being dug out of the ground, put into barrels, sent to Cape Town, sent to Austria, spent about 100 years in a box where then they happen to be the only ones easily identifiable. Almost coincidentally, it is them that ends up being taken back and reburied again at great ceremony. I don't know much about what their lives were like, but in death, the Pienaars really has been through something.
Standing by the side of the grave, I'm reminded of the phone call I had with Samuel Davids, the Nama prince. All those bones that are still in Austria, for example. Would you see the process of getting them back? Would that be a way to perhaps rejuvenate or start to repair that, bond to those traditions and, I guess, undo some of the damage that you've been speaking about?
Yes, Kate, you see, for us as African people, you should understand we've got our own language that we use. You see, you people in the Western world, you talk about DNA and those words you use. We use words like blood and bones. Blood of my blood, bone of my bones. Like we Namas people, we say Nama people are one family. We are children who eat out of one pot. Blood of my blood, bone of my bones, blood in, blood out. That's how we refer to one another, even in greetings. You understand? Those things don't get out of us. So in bringing them back, those are things that we've been fighting for and continue to fight for and will continue to fight for, because we won't rest, because the connection that we feel with them make us feel that so as long as they don't rest, we can't rest. Because you see, for us, you must understand that for people like from your part of the world, where you come from, it may just sound like some sentimental nonsense or something like that, you understand? But for us, it says a lot. I can't even describe it. There's no words for that.
Thank you for listening to Season 1 of the Unburied Podcast, the first full season by us here at ARC. If you think this kind of work is worth supporting, please go to arcdocs.org or click on the link in the show notes. Without support from our listeners, we'll eventually have to resort to uploading videos to YouTube where we talk to random people about things none of us understand. Don't worry, we won't do that, but please consider supporting this work by joining our supporters, the Archangels. This season was made with support from Iziko Museums of South Africa. It's produced, edited, sound designed and mixed by myself and Neil Liddell, with invaluable support from Dane Dodds, Naima Malaika, Neil Rush and the archaeology unit at the Iziko Museum in Cape Town, whom we're collaborating with to produce the second season of the Unburied Podcast. And in that season, we look at the extensive collection of human remains that are still at the museum. We follow the efforts of the team and community members from across the Northern Cape to rebury the ancestors who are still in boxes in a storeroom. This is a difficult but deeply moving process that's becoming a podcast series and a documentary film produced by us here at ARC. As always, if you like what you hear, please be a friend to us by sharing our work with your friends.